welcome to Forbidden Planet TV, and on today's extra special episode, we are joined by the one and only Grady Hendrix. Hi, Grady.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
I'm so excited. The last time you were over, I think we managed to do something in our Cambridge store.
Yes.
So I got my signed copy of Horror Store, and the Cambridge guys very kindly drew on the envelope like some zombies like handing me a book.
Oh, that was sweet of them, yeah.
Signed by Grady.
I like when people go the extra mile. Yeah.
So yeah, this is very exciting, and we're here to obviously talk about your brand new book, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls.
We don't have to. We can talk about anything.
We could talk about all, guys. Yeah. So I'm kind of interested. Obviously, each one of your books has kind of a very different, not fixation as such, but you've gone the haunted route. You've done vampires. So what was your kind of first foray into witchcraft? Like, was it books, films?
You know, it's funny. This wasn't going to be a witch book. It had witch in the title. It had a bunch of different titles. They always had witch in them, but it was going to be a faux horror thing because I love faux horror. But I realized as an American, I'm never going to do a faux horror book. It's much more of a British genre, I think. And so, but it was really trying hard to do that. And my editor, Jess, was like, a couple of drafts in, this isn't coming together. And she's like, it just seems a little vague. And she said, we do have witches in the title. And she said, what are you going to do for your show to promote the book? I said, well, witches. She's like, right, but no witches in the book. So then I put them in and it came together. But witches are weird because I was always a big fan of Blair Witch Project, big fan of Suspiria, and the original. I haven't seen the new one. I'm loyal. I don't cheat. And I think witches... not in reality, what I wanted to do with witches was not just make them scary people who are gonna gut you and hang you from the nearest tree. That just seemed counterproductive and a bit reductive. And so I had to sort of find some way where witches could be both sort of, what you think about witches. There's so many different versions, right? Is a witch an old lady who lives in a house made of candy and eats children? Is a witch a bunch of people dancing in a circle worshiping the moon? Is a witch a falsely accused person staying on a gallows? And sort of what your image of a witch is speaks to how comfortable you are with women in power. And so I didn't want to present my castration anxiety to the world by saying witches are just, emasculating monsters. So I had to try to figure out a way to walk a line, and it was hard. I mean, this book took me longer than it normally does, partly because it's about pregnancy. I've never been pregnant. Spoiler, I don't want to give the game away, but also really trying to get witches trying to make witches work.
Yes, yeah. And I think it was an interesting one. So at the weekend to prepare for, I was rereading this, and then I was just like, I'm going to watch The Autopsy of Jane Doe, because I hadn't seen that for ages. And I thought there's such an interesting kind of way of doing witches that it's unexpected. And I think that's something that definitely comes through with this book. That you have that kind of the not quite evil librarian, but you do have that kind of an interesting way of introducing witchcraft. So kind of was that important to have that that element of kind of almost found family and kind of that love of books as being like...
Yeah, well, books were important because A, librarians always come to my events and are like, when are you going to have a librarian? And B, there was a huge flood because the book's set in 1970 of like occult paperbacks and things. A lot of them were things you get at the supermarket shelves, like astrology books and sun signs by Linda Goodman and things. But they came out in that time period, so these books were everywhere. It wouldn't be until the 80s there was sort of a pushback on like the occult as sort of part of mainstream pop culture. And the other thing was, this is what witches do legendarily. They transmit information. Young witches learn from old witches. Spells are passed down orally and all that kind of thing. And that's kind of librarians, right? They pass along information down through generations and get it to people who need it. And you have a house full of women who don't have any of the information they need. What's going to happen when my baby comes? What's going to happen to the baby? What's happening in my body? What horrible things my body going to do next? No one's telling them. It's none of their business. So that was all. It all seemed to tie together. It's amazing, once you get your head out of your ass and stop trying to write a folk horror novel and start actually writing a witch and figuring out where the story's going and going there rather than trying to force it into what you want, lots of things start tying together. And that's sort of how I always know, or not always, that's how I know I'm on the right track.
And what was kind of the first thing about this book? Because you were saying obviously before about it not quite coming together at first. What was the first thing that clicked? Was it a certain character for you, or
no? So the first thing that clicked for me was I have two relatives who were both sent away to maternity homes when they were teenagers, and none of us in the family knew this until they were in their 70s. They just never talked about it again, and it always kind of blew my mind. And when I heard about that, I was trying to sort of wrap my head around it. It just seemed so cruel, and I was trying to wrap my head around it. And so I read this book by Ann Fessler that's kind of the only book about maternity homes that's out there, called The Girls Who Went Away. It's an oral history where the women who were sent away, she interviewed them years later. And I was thinking, God, there's a story. I mean, it's girls, I mean teenagers, sent away. They've been told they've ruined their lives. They're pregnant. They're told they're horrible people. They go to a place where no one knows them. They get a fake name. They're not allowed to talk about their backgrounds. They're there with other girls who are also pregnant. I was like, oh, there's got to be a story here. But it took me a really long time to feel like I was ready to tackle it. And even then I wasn't ready to tackle it, but to trick myself into thinking I would, to develop the overweening self-confidence to think I could. And the first thing that really clicked for me, there's a book from I think 1903 called I Await the Devil's Coming by Mary McLean, which is basically about how boring it is to live in Montana and how much she can't wait for the devil to come and take her away. And I read it, and it got reissued a few years ago, and it was very famous back in the day. And I read it, and I was like, I want that voice. And so the book starts with sort of this one-page thing at the beginning, sit, listen, all that. And that's right out of Mary McLean. If you've read I Await the Devil's Coming, you will accuse me of plagiarism. It is just absolutely her voice. And then it was just a matter of, okay, well, what would happen if you were sent to a home? Well, you'd have to have an awkward car ride to get there, you know, and just going step by step. But Mary McLean was really the way in.
Yeah. That definitely, I could see that on a band T-shirt as well. That's just like a perfect like first album.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. There used to be. She was so popular back in the day that girls in colleges would form Mary McLean leagues and go out and perform, commit random crimes. Yeah. They'd steal horses, they'd rob stores, they'd mug people, and they were just like, yeah, we're like doing it for Mary McLean. So you know, I mean, yeah, her legend continues. Hopefully, yeah. I hope people start doing that again.
There we go. And kind of, I suppose, talking of witchcraft and a more almost kind of a modern day kind of witchcraft, because especially during lockdown and kind of post-lockdown, kind of sales for witchcraft, especially for the but I'm sure other places as well, have gone through the roof. So there seems to be a almost kind of maybe secular kind of nature to kind of coming back to witchcraft.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I would say it never really went away, but yes, I don't disagree. Well, witchcraft is interesting because it's one of those things that is always two things at once. So one of the reasons I think it appealed to people so much in lockdown is witchcraft's very much about covens and belonging and being part of a group. But witchcraft's also about being alone, you know, the lone witch in the woods, the woman in the house made of candy, the Blair Witch, you know. So you get, you know, it celebrates isolation and living on your own as much as it celebrates togetherness. Witches are real. I mean, you know, people die for being witches, but they're also completely fictional. I mean, there's no such thing. They're fictional. So it's one of those things that embraces its own contradictions. And I think that's kind of the key to witches. You know, vampires are a predator that looks like us. Ghosts are, you know, our relationship with our own mortality. Werewolves are about, you know, anger and bodily transformation. You know, witches are about embracing those contradictions, I think.
I suppose then there's almost, obviously vampires can kind of masquerade, but there's something about witchcraft and witches that they're just so kind of, I suppose maybe that's why people were fearful, because they're so human that they could easily kind of, you know, get by in society and stuff, and hence you obviously have like...
Well, you know, in reality, the last thing you'd want is to be accused of being a witch.
Yes.
But in fiction, witches have always been, I mean, there's some exceptions, Roald Dahl's The Witches and things, but witches in general have always been quite out. You know, they've never been in the closet, really. They wear their witchhood very prominently.
Yeah, definitely. So to come back to the book and such a fantastic kind of cast of characters, so is there any one of the characters that particularly kind of surprised you, like as you were writing? And...
Yeah, well, I mean, they all do to some extent. You know, I loved writing Rose. It's always fun to write an asshole, and Rose is an asshole, but a lovely one. there's a character, Myrtle, in the book who plays a very small part, but originally she was one of the main girls. And I loved Myrtle. She was just in complete denial that she was pregnant, and she was so much fun to write. People who are in denial of reality and insist on their own point of view are fun to write. But then Myrtle came to sort of a dark end in many, many drafts of this book and was a real bummer. And I loved her a lot, but ultimately for space and to sort of open up the book, I had to reduce her role to almost nothing. So she was fun to write. Holly was the most surprising, though, because Holly, it's really easy to ignore someone in a book. And Holly was always kind of function, not character. It was like, oh, she's the one they all feel bad. She was always, I always defined her in terms of her function. She's young, so they feel sorry for her. She's the one who's been molested, or so they, want to help her and all this. And it wasn't until mini draft, and this was a book that took 14 really different drafts, but it wasn't until I would say draft 10 that I was like, I really got to get a hold of Holly. And then she generated so much more material. I was like, because I finally started taking her seriously, and I was a bit embarrassed. I'd been sort of dismissive to her before that, but I'm as victim to my own prejudices as anyone else.
There is, I have to say, Holly is probably my favorite character, because there's kind of a quietness, but also a strength to her, which is so interesting to kind of.
Well, she's survived all these things, and she's a bit feral, and so it was just really. I was embarrassed it took me so long, because it was so much fun to be in her. Not fun, but it was so. Unexpected to be in her head, just sort of where she wanted to go with stuff. And I'm not one of those writers who's like, oh, my characters come to life. But there is a thing where you realize if you're writing, into something that seems like something a character would do, or against it, because you need to force them into the plot. So yeah, it was embarrassing. It took me so long to come around to Holly.
And there's definitely a Rose kind of like, I don't know, like 90s, almost like Heather's kind of mentality to her.
Yeah. Well, I like people who really are just confident in their opinions, even if their opinions are wrong. Yeah. I really admire that confidence.
we all work with some of those people.
So. Exactly.
So the another kind of interesting thing I've heard you kind of speak about in interviews before is kind of the difference that you found when researching between kind of black families and white families, and how they were dealing with kind of pregnancies in in their youth, in their communities. So yeah, if you could kind of tell us a bit more about that. And
sure. I mean, this is, over here, you guys have a very, similar but different. I think maternity homes existed, and certainly in Ireland had the Magdalene laundries and things. What was that book? A Few Small Things. Claire, what's her name? I feel very ignorant. I should have looked it up before I came on. Yeah. Things like these. But which was a lovely book, but that was very much about a Magdalene laundry. So in the States, though, the homes, they were run by different Catholic charities, or Salvation Army, or Florence Crittenden, but then they were independent homes. And generally, there were, I would, the idea was, and this is certainly something that's been said to me while writing the book, is, this was the best thing for these girls. Like, what else could they do? Yes, the world is a sad place, but if they stayed home and had their babies and people knew, they would have been social outcasts, and there would have been a lot of prejudice against them. But you look on the other side, in black families, I think the numbers are around 73% of them that had an unexpected pregnancy or a teen pregnancy in them kept the child within the family. Sometimes it would be another relative would raise the child, a grandmother or a cousin or an aunt. Sometimes it would be farmed, they're not farmed out, that's a terrible way to say, but it would be put for adoption to another family member or to a family friend. But the baby was not, it was not hidden and adopted by a stranger more often than not. 73, I think, percent of the time. And so there was an alternative. Black families embraced that alternative by and large. There were black-only maternity homes, and there definitely were integrated maternity homes at a certain point once integration happened to the U.S. But and that's Zinnia's character is certainly that. But that was a small minority of black families that had an unexpected pregnancy. And statistically, there's no reason to believe those kids grew up happier or sadder than any other kid, who was adopted, or it's the outcomes seem about normal. So there was an alternative, just people didn't think it was for them because black people are not, at the thinking at the time, well, they're different. So so it was definitely not seen as something that a white family could do.
And there's
and many black families felt like it wasn't an alternative.
Yeah, no.
Or some.
Yeah. And I think obviously there are scenes in this book that are heartbreaking to read, and especially when, you know, obviously when a lot of the kind of characters, I suppose, especially obviously Rose has the idea of kind of, you know, keeping the baby and being able to kind of, you know, I'll go off to like Woodstock or whatever, and going, you know, and knowing that there's no other solution.
But you know, one of the things that I think books can do that a lot of things can't do, or other art forms can't do, is you get to play with time in a way. And you know, there's this really trite sentiment that I hate, this sort of "it gets better," and people are always like, "Oh, kids, you know, I know things seem bad now, it gets better." And I would imagine if I was 15 and hearing that, I would heartily invite that person to go fuck themselves. Like, you know, no, it doesn't. This is the worst moment of my life. I have ruined everything. And oftentimes life progresses 10, 15, 20 years later. You're like, that wasn't the end. You know, I had more life there. And that was something I was able to do with this book, not give it a trite sentiment like it's better, but yes, Rose had something terrible happen with their child, but she went on to live a life, and that wasn't the ending. She thought the middle was the end, and the middle was the middle. But you don't know that when you're living your life. For all I know, this is the last moment in my life. I'm going to walk out the door and get run over by a bus. And this is it. This is it. I mean, but, you know, or I'm going to go on or I'm going to be, you know, commit some terrible crime. You don't know what's going to happen next. And so it was nice to be able to do that as an author, to sort of pull back to that sort of like larger perspective and let these characters live out their lives. And so things they thought were the end turned out to be the middle. Because it was basically the long-winded, work-intensive way of saying it gets better.
Yes.
Rather than saying it gets better, which I find myself gagging a little as I say that.
Yeah, it sounds like it should be on like a trucker hat or something.
Yeah, well, it's also so trite to say that to someone who's like dealing with something horrible. Like, it gets better. Well, but that's so like devalues that moment of pain they're in. You know.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Tell them it gets worse. It might get better. 50-50, it gets worse.
So a couple of things we definitely have to talk about.
Werewolves.
Werewolves. We're getting there.
People don't talk about them enough.
No, they really need to. Some of the descriptions of food, which I'm a foodie, and it actually kind of put me off eating.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I'd be like, that sounds disgusting.
Mission accomplished.
I know. Okay. Yeah. Are they actual?
Yes.
Recipes?
So the one that gets everyone is hamburger pancakes. Yeah. Because everyone assumes, and I did see a recipe in a I think it was, I want to say Ladies' Home Journal, but it was for a pancake that you'd mushed ground meat into. But that's rare. But everyone imagines that when they hear hamburger pancake. Actually, what hamburger pancakes are, and what did someone call them? They said they had a different name. They called them Russian steaks when they were growing up. But basically what it is it's ground beef and you mix it with egg white. And so it's sort of like a filler, so it gets bigger. So you have a bigger, more filling thing as a way to sort of stretch the meat. And it's actually apparently not terrible. Okay. And is still eaten by human beings who maintain their sanity to this day. But yeah, I had a friend who was like, oh yeah, we knew those as Russian steaks growing up. Or maybe Russian hamburgers, one or the other. Anyways, but the other ones, so one of the things I thought was fascinating is there was such, and there still is, I think, an obsession with what pregnant women eat, right? You're allowed to, and there were a lot of these 1970s, 1960s child rearing books and family planning books were very, one of them, which is the Guttmacher, which in the States was sort of the gold standard. It was called like Children in Parenting or Childhood in Parenting. And he was many editions, the gold standard parenting book, sort of the what to expect when you're expecting. And he's like, you can gain, he worked at the formula, it was like 24.5 pounds. I'm like, half? Really? Like, I go to 25 and I'm getting pre-eclampsia? Like, what? Why that half? And there was something so specific and punitive about it. And I remember growing up that a lot of people I didn't know, but like thinking back on it, cousins and stuff were always so concerned about their weight and things. Now I think no one cares. They know that generally, unless you've got some medical thing going on, who cares? And so that kind of thing really, I was like, oh, I need to start looking up food. I started looking up like recommended recipes and diets. And then I come from a Southern family that really has some dicey recipes in there. And from a mother who's a Southern woman who cannot cook to save her life. Her relationship with the kitchen is very adversarial. And so I was like, oh, well, let's just go to town. It is a horror novel after all.
No, it makes sense. I mean, I think obviously in England there was lots of things in jelly that seemed to definitely have a moment.
Yeah, well, so. I grew up in Dulwich for a few years when I was a little kid, and going to school here, this was the boiled Brussels sprouts, big vat of custard with skin on top, kind of school lunch. And I remember I couldn't do the Brussels sprouts, and like I would have to sit there for hours. I mean, I think it was usually a Brussels sprouts, there was a 2-hour thing where I just sit there as they got colder and colder until I was allowed to eat them, and I had made to gag them down. So yeah, I was definitely.
See, Brussels sprouts have kind of like, they're now a trendy food. Because it's like, oh, you fry them.
Well, people stop boiling them. Well, I mean, there's not many things except maybe tea that boiling improves. Boiling usually wrecks something in general, you know?
And definitely there's a thing, just thinking of tea, especially I'm not gonna say all Americans, but I know some Americans will put it in the microwave.
Oh, that's a bit, No, it's funny. When I was a kid, we had a microwave oven, and then we discovered there was a crack in the shielding, and my mother, I'm sure it was totally fine, except for the tiny face I've grown on my back that screams. But like once a week it does that. But like we were all so flipped out by our mom's response that to this day I won't own a microwave, because all I can think of is my mom talking about the harmful radiation killing everyone in the house. So yeah, I was traumatized.
And talking of your mom's love of cooking, my mom actually blew up the household microwave. I don't know how she did it.
Oh, wow.
So we had, when my older brother, we'd both obviously moved down, we were just like, oh, we'll get you a microwave, and
because it's no harm, no fuss way of cooking.
And she, within a week, blown up.
Blown up.
She wouldn't tell me what happened.
Did you see the wreckage?
Still to this day.
Is there a scorch mark on the wall?
She's just like, no, it's gone now. And you're just like,
oh, wow, what happened?
This is the thing.
Yeah.
This thing, I don't know. Geez. Every so often we'll mention it.
Well, there's one of those things where microwaves have so many settings that no one ever uses, right? You put it in for 2 minutes. Or 3 minutes. Like you never, there's multiple settings, because I think they need to fill up the keypad with buttons. And I'm always convinced one of those settings will either blow up the microwave or open a portal, you know?
Potentially. And I haven't learned from my mistakes, because I brought them a coffee machine at Christmas, because I'd be like, now you can make coffee even quicker. And just, have you used it? No.
Wow. At least it didn't blow up.
But, you know,
actually, people are going to start thinking you're trying to kill your parents. You keep giving them appliances that explode.
Well, I mean, they don't watch this, but if they are,
get to a safe place immediately. No more gifts.
I still think they don't really understand what I do.
Oh, well, that's parents,
But hey, that's parents. And another thing we're obviously going to kind of have to talk about, and for anyone out there who's a little bit squeamish, there are obviously a few scenes of, as you mentioned before, childbirth and various things happening with the body. How was that to kind of like research, like?
It didn't take long for me to realize I'd bitten off a lot more than I could chew. Right. And actually, I tried to cancel this book at one point. I had a conversation with my editor and my agent at a certain point, like, what's the backup plan here? Because I just could not crack it. But I had 12 moms who were very generous with sort of sharing their birth stories and letting me ask stupid and repetitive questions that were quite invasive. I had 4 OBs who worked with me, and they all do, I call them OBs, but some laborists and all that, but they're like very gradated. But they all really, and they were very patient. I had my Williams obstetrics from 1968, which I consulted a lot. I had my Ina May Gaskin midwifing books, and actually it was funny, I was, was it this time last year? It might have been this time last year or the year before. I can't quite remember. Maybe the year before. I was in London with family, and I had gone off to a bar, and I was reading my Ina May Gaskin midwifing book, and I was always terrified of childbirth. Like, I was never going to get pregnant, but it's always depicted as saying, once it starts, you're not getting off that train. And like, you know, And I was really like, at this point I find it fascinating, but this was, quite graphic photos of babies exiting the birth canal and things, and the guy next to me just sort of like shifted down a few seats. It was like I was in the West End at some posh place, like, waiting, getting a drink before a show, and I was like, oh yeah, okay. And then I was really proud. I'm like, okay, I'm starting to like take this in stride, because babies look like little terrible mutants when they come out. But yeah, and so all of that, and it was, and it was really their doing, all these people who helped me out to really get my head around. And then I did silly things like, I would take a 5-pound weight and stick it down my pants and walk around for a couple of days and sleep with it, because I was like, I wanted to know what it was like to sort of be in the world with your body weight off like that. Wow. I mean, it was very silly, trust me.
Like flower babies.
Yeah. and I could have just done the sensible thing and written this book if I was a woman and had been pregnant, and then I would know all the answers. Instead, I need an army of consultants. And it was actually interesting. There were things in the book that I thought were a big deal, that women were like, whatever. There was a scene of the main character getting her first internal exam from a doctor she doesn't know. And I was like, well, that would be horrible. You're 15 years old, this doctor doesn't get, and when you're 15 in 1970, you did not get, you didn't get an internal exam until you were probably an adult, and then only if you needed one. And so, determined by your doctor, of course, who was probably a guy. And I made it this really terrible. I was like, oh my God, I've captured this experience. This is so alien, so invasive. It's such a violation. And every woman without fail who read it was like, ho hum. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, welcome to the rest of your life. Like, they're like, what's the big deal? And I was like, oh, I don't know if you remember the, menstrual cramp simulator that was on TikTok, God, and every guy who wore it was like screaming agony, and all the women were like, what's the big deal? This was my menstrual cramp machine moment, where I was like, oh, I get it. This is just what a woman lives with every single day, and it's not a big deal unless you're like, a rube like me, who's like sort of a tourist in someone else's country. And I was like, I was in the country of women gawking at the buildings, and I was like, okay, so I very much reduced that scene. I was like, but there were a few things like that where I don't have that experience to speak to it. And so I tried not to make any grand statements and just tell the story as much as I could.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's very, the scenes have the impact that they need. And I suppose for a lot of women, like I haven't had children, but your kind of first experiences, like as a kid, and kind of what you hear, it's enough to kind of make you think twice.
Well, and it used to be a big thing. It's funny. There used to be this big push. I don't know how it was in the UK, but in the US, in the States, that they didn't want sexual education in high school to be explicit because they thought it would scare women off of having babies. I'm like, what? Like, that is the most raw, like, are you kidding me? Like, let's keep the poor darlings and, keep them in a closet in the dark until it's time to bring them out to have their baby. Like, it's so ridiculous. Like, but even now, I think some people they don't want to know. I definitely have friends who are like, I don't want to know. I just want to go through it. And I'm the opposite of that. I'm like, I want to know every possibility, outcome, potential alternative. I want it all. Lay it out on the table. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing because this idea that you will be put off by childbirth, by seeing, it's an intense experience. But I also think, and sorry, not to ramble on, but I think there's this real urge to split things into good or bad. This was a good experience. This was a bad experience. I liked this. I didn't like that. And I think there's a lot of books about childbirth that sort of do that. This is bad, and the baby's a monster, and you turn into a werewolf. Or it's good, and the baby's sort of a soft-focused, gauzy experience, and there's your bundle of joy. And the impression I got from talking to people who'd had kids, both dads and moms, was having a baby isn't good or bad. It is an experience, and you go in it one person and you come out of it someone else.
Yes.
And it changes you. For the better or for the worse, does it matter? Like, it's not a Yelp review. You know what I mean? You're not recommending this restaurant, but it is an experience. And I think there's a few things like that. I think a parent dying is an experience like that. I think having kids is an experience like that. I think having a sibling die or having a disease or something that affects you, like losing a leg, is like that. Is it good? Is it bad? No, but it changes you.
Yes.
And I think I tried to avoid putting a tag on it if it was good or bad.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's a nice kind of segue into like How to Sell a Haunted House, for example, like the idea of obviously losing a parent and that
Right.
being, you know, losing obviously both parents is such a, it changes you.
Losing both parents to haunted dolls. I mean, that changes you. Yeah.
That is something.
One can lose a parent to a haunted doll, but if one loses two parents to a haunted doll, it looks like more than carelessness.
No, we had on last year we had Garth Nix on, and he has a puppet of one of his characters, and he was talking very fondly about the puppet, and I was just kind of like, "What a puppet!" You say?
Well, I know, but you're surrounded right now by puppets and dolls. I mean, all these like vinyl figurines. Yeah, no, I know, but it's like we surround ourselves with these little versions of ourselves, and you know, and part of that book came from realizing I hadn't read much that was about our relationship with inanimate objects, and man, we have relationship. I mean, things we're reluctant to throw away, childhood stuffed animals, you know, our cars, our laptops. Don't you dare crash on me! Oh, you know, like, you know, I mean, like we talk to these things and develop these relationships with them, but they're inanimate. But there's rich relationships, you know. I can't throw away my favorite sweater, even though it doesn't fit me and hasn't fit me in 20 years. It's my favorite sweater. Like, I can't throw, you know, it's like, what does that mean? Like, what relationship is it? It's inanimate. It has no opinion of you, but we project one onto it.
Yes. Yeah. Do you have many of those things?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, you know, stuffed animals from childhood, it's really trying because it's one of the things, they're going to outlast you. So what do? You know what I mean? Put in a box? Well, that's not comedy. Well, how would you like to be put in a box? Well, like, you know, where are you going to put your stuffed animal? Near the TV with the remote? Like, what do you do? Like, what's your obligation to this thing? Well, nothing. But in your head, you spend so much time projecting feelings onto it that it kind of has acquired these things. Even if it's a totally subjective thing. That's very complicated. Yeah. You know? Like, I mean, what do people do with their papers when they die? Burn them, keep them, put them in an archive? Like, you know, I'm of the burn it variety, but I know people who are like, oh, I can't do that. I can't throw away that draft. I can't throw away that letter. You know, I say burn it all, but, you know, it's all these different relationships, and it's just all inanimate stuff. It's ink and paper. It's rag and thread.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Obviously, having recently moved,
oh,
there's very much of, okay, you want a fresh start in some respects.
Sure.
So you let's get some new pots and pans and stuff. But then you're just like, oh, but I can't get rid of this.
Yeah. How long ago did you move?
A week ago.
Okay.
So it's all like.
So have you hit the point yet where you're regretting getting rid of something you got rid of?
See, I'm not sure I've realised what I got rid of yet. And it will be like, as I've been putting like books away and stuff, and you're just like, I did take a load of things to the charity shop, and it might be I fancy and then it will hit.
You know, it's funny, my mom years ago, about 15 years ago, she moved from the house we grew up in to a smaller house that made more sense for someone living on their own, and she sold a lot of books. We're a big family of readers, and she sold a lot of books to a shop downtown, and she spent the next 5 years buying them back one at a time. And eventually he just like cleared them from the shelves and put them in the back. And when she'd come in and say, did you sell that copy of, some with such and such I wanted? He'd be like, oh, let me see if I have it in the back. Oh, I have a different copy. She goes, looks like the one I had. I mean, he did a lot to salvage her dignity. Yeah. But yeah, she bought almost, I think there were 3 she didn't buy back, and she sold them like 150 books.
Wow.
Yeah.
The fact that I suppose it would be, you kind of feel like you're decluttering and you're doing a good thing. Right. But yeah, you probably have formed attachments to things like that.
Yeah, it's in, you know, you're looking for, I was just talking to someone who, when their mother moved, she had all those National Trust guidebooks, you know, that you get when you go in and say, you buy it for £4 and it's your donation. And she's like, I thought, you know, this is something in my mom's house. She has like hundreds of these, just gone out to the charity shop. And literally 2 weeks later, her mom was like, do you have that guide? I wanted to look something up for Avebury, and I looked for my guide and I could not find it anywhere. And she was like, oh God.
Oh God.
Exactly.
Just booting up Google, but it's not the same.
It's not the same. It's not the same.
Not the same. So coming towards the end of the interview today, so we've got a couple more questions. Yeah. So you mentioned about kind of a love of folklore.
Sure.
So is there a particular film or book that you would recommend in that space?
Oh man, well, you know, it's funny. the UK does such a better job with this stuff than the US. I think because we're a much younger country, and when you dig into our history, there's just a lot of dead bodies and genocide, you know, which you guys have, but not quite in the great quantities we do. And America, we're so much bigger. It was like a humble brag. We've got more genocide. But so really my touchstones are the UK. And I lived here when I was a kid for a few years in the 70s. And so there's stuff from children's television that I just really, it resonates with me on a very personal level. But one of them is, I just went out to Avebury, speaking of, and I was like, oh my God, this is where they shot Children of the Stones, that 1976 ITV faux horror. So I was like, oh, you know, I was the Tom Baker era of Doctor Who, which always worked in some of that. Actually, it was more John Pertwee who did more faux horror. But, you know, so that's sort of like, Nigel Neal, you know, Moraine Against the Crowd kind of stuff. That's sort of like BBC, you know, shot on film on 16 millimeter in a rainy countryside where everything shades of brown and mulch. And there's some old lady living in a house and you don't go near her. That's sort of my iconic go-to. But I think ultimately, I mean, if you're saying faux horror, I still every now and then will rewatch The Wicker Man and just be astonished at how well that movie does everything it does. I mean, it's like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's like you watch it and you're like, no, this movie can never be overrated. Everything it does is perfect and unique, and that's The Wicker Man.
Yeah, and those villages still exist.
Yeah,
you still drive through the movie, like.
Yeah, no, I was just staying out in the countryside and there at a place called Coombe Hay, and I was like, oh man, I'm glad I'm not here on May Day. I'm glad I leave a few days before May Day. You know. On the other hand, it'd be an honor to be burned for the corn. You know,
You know, you're giving back to society in such a way.
Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Exactly. There we go. So second to last question, what are you working on now?
So I'm working on I should be working on my next book, but instead I'm doing book tour, but I'm dying to get back because I've sort of like started to pick up momentum, and it's a book I've wanted to write for a very long time and I can never crack it. And last fall, while I was wrapping up Witchcraft, I was like, oh, this is the element it needed. So now I'm working on that. It's a monster book, but it also has absolutely no women in it whatsoever. And I didn't realize that until I was sort of like starting to really crack into it. I was like, oh, yeah, there are no women. Oh, okay. So we'll see. So I'm actually a little nervous. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. But every book I write, I try to do something technically that makes me a little uncomfortable. Obviously with this, writing about a book where almost every character is pregnant, which I've never been. And with this, it's going to be writing a book with literally no women in it.
Is it, without kind of asking too much, is it going to be kind of a one POV or just like a small group of... I don't know, and I gotta figure that out. That sort of thing. I mean, Witchcraft was written in present tense first person for probably 6 or 7 drafts. And then I realized that point of view was too close and readers were really put off by it. And so I was like, okay, third person past tense. And that seemed to back off a little bit and give people the perspective. So I never know, you know? I'm very bad at writing in first person. I think I've only written 1 book in first person, and I like first person. I like reading it. Right. But yeah, it doesn't seem to be a natural fit for me as a writer. Well, we look forward to maybe 2026. I'm hoping 2026. Yes. Well, we're ready for it whenever it's done. And for our last question, so what are you currently reading, watching, and if you game, what are you playing? Oh, okay. I don't game. Years ago, I was kind of like, I love console gaming. I was just like, I got to get rid of my PlayStation. Like, I will never get any work done. Like, you know what I mean? It's just too easy to be like, I'm going to take a 10-minute break to play X, and then 45 minutes later, you're like, you know what I mean? It was I had to get rid of it. So I miss gaming, but yeah, I gave up on gaming. I figure that's for retirement for me. Watching, you know, I'm dying to see Sinners. I haven't really watched a lot lately, unfortunately. I just rewatched Children of the Stones, but that's about it. Reading, I'm doing a lot of, it's mostly older stuff, but I actually just read Tender is the Flesh. You know?
And I did not enjoy it in the slightest, but it really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Like it really, I mean, it's sort of like J.G. Ballard in the sense of reading this as an unpleasant experience, but then it kind of sticks to your ribs. And so I really highly recommend it. And and I just read Mariana Enriquez's new book of short stories. I like her novel. She only had one novel translated, but which I liked, but her short stories I think are really magnificent. And this is, I think it's a sunny place for shady people or a shady place for sunny people. I can't quite remember which it is, but which I loved as well. But but Tender is the Flesh really stuck with me.
There's so many kind of great books out there, isn't there? It's finding the time, it's balancing everything out.
Well, it's also, you know, there's so many Spanish language writers who are not getting translated, which really I'm really weirded out by that, especially in the States when we like share a landmass. And so I really feel like there's a lot of good writers. Mariana Enriquez, I mean, she's got so much of her stuff that's such, you know, one of the biggest sci-fi writers in Spain, who's a woman, she's a very respected AI scientist there. She's written like 5 or 6 sci-fi novels. Nothing she's written has ever been translated. I mean, there's so much stuff. So it's really, you know, you start realizing there's even more out there than you think there is. And then, you know, well, what am I doing talking to you? Why aren't I working my way through the mail and the books? And then as people, it's sort of getting towards their later life, start realizing, my mother said this, she's like, I realize I'm going to die before I read all the books I want to read. And I was like,
what
I know. But we're all going to have that moment, right? Where your to-be read pile is going to outstrip you. It's like, you know, being older and getting a pet. I don't know who's going first.
Someone's going to feed someone.
One of these books is, I mean, they're, you know, unless you time it very well, you're going to die not being halfway through a book. That's just odds. Or halfway through a series or a game. You're going to not finish something and come back as it goes.
And you won't be able to then pick up the thing.
Oh my God, I didn't even think about that. That's the worst. Oh, Jesus. That's terrible. I wish I hadn't done this imagery. I never thought about that part of it. Thanks for nothing.
And when you do finally get back to gaming, there is a game on PC called Haunted House Simulator.
Ooh.
And basically, they roll out a different haunted house that you go into, and you have to spot the thing that is haunted. And it's like a timed thing. So you're just like, oh, okay, sometimes it's an obvious thing, and then like sometimes you're just like, what's wrong with this room? I think you.
Oh, that's very cool. Well, you know, it's funny, like, with virtual reality, I've used a headset once or twice, and I'm like, God, this is such a natural for horror. Like, you know, where, like, I mean, even putting on a virtual reality headset, and you're like, I am completely cut off from where my body is right now. It's just terrifying.
That's kind of why I don't...
It's sleep paralysis.
Yes. God, that is terrible. Everyone's got one thing that's my like.
Oh, do you ever have it?
I've had it once, and I think it was a fair few years ago, and I was doing my degree, and I just remember being awake but not being awake kind of thing. And it was the weirdest.
Oh, it's awful. Yeah.
Like I thought I was gonna die.
Yeah, I get it pretty regularly. And it's not good. But I just found out my nephew, who's in his late 20s now, he's suffered from it almost all his life, from late teenage years to now. And his thing is, because I think everyone who suffers from it regularly, you have a standard hallucination you go back to. And his, it turns out, is bugs in the bed, and he can't move. And like,
Oh God.
Yeah, I know. His girlfriend was like, oh, it's really weird. He'll like wake up being like, I got it, thinking he's like, there's like spiders in the bed.
Oh God.
Yeah, he doesn't like it at all.
Oh God. No.
What did you hallucinate? Anything? Do you remember?
Well, weirdly enough, I used to be a barista when I was a student, and I was hallucinating like making tons of coffees and getting kind of overwhelmed.
Oh, there's an anxiety dream,
so it was properly like with waking up at a friend's house, and my friend was like, what the hell?
Because you were like shouting?
I was just like, we're out of coffee beans, we need to grind for coffee. What is going on? So I still like coffee, but
No, a friend of mine was just telling me that to him, he's a horror writer, but he's like, the scariest thing to me is sleepwalking. He's like, because who's driving the bus? He's like, who's driving that thing? So similar thing, right? What's your head doing when you're not watching it?
Yeah, that's
it gets up to tricks.
Sleepwalking is also terrifying, because I have a friend of mine who does sleepwalk, and once we went to like, I think we went to like Alton Towers like a few years ago, so obviously a big amusement park, and we'd stayed at a hotel the night before, and I just heard the door go, and you know, you're just like, who's come in? And I looked and I was, she's gone out.
She was out like of the house.
Yeah, we were staying in a hotel, so we were staying somewhere near.
How far did she get?
Luckily, like only a few. Like I heard the door go, and then I was like, "Who came in?" And then I was just like, "Oh God!"
Was she just in the hall?
Yeah.
Was she on her way to the elevator or walking away?
Luckily, just a few steps away. She was heading towards where the elevator was.
That's weird.
But that's terrifying, because you just think, luckily I'm a light sleeper. But I was just like, I don't know how far she went.
But also, like, that her unconscious body knew enough to head towards the elevator. Yes. Like, it's like some weird alien was driving the machine. It's like, I know humans ride in these, you know, I'll go to this. No, that's awful.
No, that's why I don't really see her much anymore.
Yeah.
It's probably for the best.
I imagine. Yeah. Well, what did you do when you found? Did you wake her up? Because that the folktale, the myth is you don't wake up a sleepwalker.
Yeah, no, I just kind of gently pulled her around and put her back, and she just came back into the room. But
that's creepy.
But I felt very aware of, I can't, like, again, like, what should you do? Like, I was thinking, I shouldn't wake this person.
Did she interact with you at all?
No, just so weird. But yeah. that was terrifying. So yeah, sorry, Emma. Yeah, thank you so much, Grady, for joining us
for having me
today. And we'll have a ton of signed stocks. So for anyone out there who wants to grab a signed copy of Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, or indeed any of Grady's books, you'll be able to order on our website or pop into any of our 10 stores in the next week or so, and they'll have signed copies available. But yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in at home, and we will see you very soon. Bye.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.